Hi, it's Michael Senoff with Michael Senoff's HardToFindSeminars.com. The title of this interview is called, According to a World-Famous Doctor, Eating Certain Foods Will Turn Your Heart Disease into a Harmless Paper Tiger That You'll Never Need to Worry About Again. If you think heart disease is just a natural part of aging, don't bet your heart on it. The author of Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, Dr. Caldwell B. Esselstyn, says it's actually a food-borne illness with a simple cure that even the unhealthiest of people can conquer once and for all. But you won't hear that from the government, and you won't study it in school. In fact, Dr. Esselstyn says that this is the one disappointment he has with modern medicine. It's simply failing its patients, and in this audio, you'll hear all about it. You'll also hear the amazing discovery scientists learned about curing heart disease from the Nazis in World War II, and why you've probably never heard about it before. You'll learn the dark secret your doctor is trying to hide from you about bypasses and stents, and what you need to know before you let anyone cut you open. You'll learn exactly what Dr. Esselstyn says in the one and only way doctors today can adequately treat heart disease and stop killing their patients. You'll learn about 3 foods you'll never want to eat again. You'll learn the ugly truth about the USDA and why Dr. Esselstyn says having them make the food pyramid is like having Al Capone do your taxes. You'll learn the exact steps you can take to regain power over your heart disease today. Dr. Esselstyn says everyone who eats a traditional Western diet has cardiovascular disease right now. And although you may not have a heart attack for 30 years, he says you'll never have a heart attack again if you follow his advice. And in this interview, you'll hear exactly what that advice is. Now let's get going.
Hi, this is Chris Costello, and I've teamed up with Michael Senoff to bring you the world's best health-related interviews. So if you know anyone struggling with their weight, with cancer, diabetes, ADHD, autism, heart disease, or other health issues, send them over to Michael Senoff's HardToFindSeminars.com. Dr. Esselstyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So we are really excited about your book. You know, this country is just in a free-fall crisis, as I'm sure you are well aware of, with heart disease and obesity and all of those conditions. And your family, sounds like, had a lot of heart disease. That is an interesting story.
Let me just say that I think that the truth be known that heart disease is nothing more than a toothless paper tiger that need never even exist. And if it does exist, it need never ever progress. This is a food-borne illness. Yes, as far as my own family is concerned, my dad had his first heart attack at age 43. But I think if we really take our cue from the global perspective, it's fascinating when you begin to look across the various cultures on this planet where heart disease is virtually non-existent. For instance, if you happen to be a heart surgeon and you wanted to set up a practice either in the Papua Highlands in New Guinea, the rural Chinese, Central Africa, or the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico, forget it. You better plan on selling pencils because there's just not going to be any heart disease there. I was never a cardiologist, never a heart surgeon. My primary responsibilities were in surgery of the thyroid and parathyroid, but it was as chairman of our breast cancer task force that I suddenly began to get very, very curious and interested in nutrition, because no matter how many women I was operating for breast cancer, I was doing absolutely nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. And that led to this global research, which was really quite provocative, because you found that in Kenya, Africa, for instance, the incidence of breast cancer was something like 20 or 30 times less than the United States. And in rural Japan in the 1950s, breast cancer was practically unheard of. Yet when the Japanese women would migrate to the United States by the second and third generation, still pure Japanese American, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. And perhaps even more compelling was the prostate cancer story. How many men in 1958 in the entire nation of Japan died from cancer of the prostate? 18. And yet by 1978, they're up to 137, which still pales in comparison to the 28,000 who will succumb this year in this country. So we had these very provocative differences globally in cancer, but I felt that my bones would long be dust before I could really get some answers with nutrition and cancer, although in hindsight, I'm not sure that's correct. So my decision was to try to get at cancer through heart disease, because it was so apparent that heart disease is not cancer, and it is not obligatory in any sense. It's just not a disease of aging. We have so many examples of people who live to be 80, 90, and 100 without even a hint of any kind of vascular disease, because they're plant-based. So that was sort of the provocative start of all this. And there was another very intriguing story that occurred, and that was what happened in World War II. It was characteristic of the Axis powers of Germany when they overran the Low Countries of Holland and Belgium and they occupied Denmark and Norway. The Germans characteristically would take away the livestock of these countries. That is, they take away their cattle, their sheep, their goats, their pigs, their chickens, their turkeys. So that largely, these countries were now eating plant-based during the war years, 1939 through 1945. And there is a very interesting scientific paper about Norway during that time when their rates of heart disease and stroke absolutely plummeted during 1939 to 1945 when they were deprived of their meat and dairy. And yet, as soon as there was a cessation of hostilities, and back came the meat, back came the dairy, and zoom, up went the strokes and heart attacks again. Very provocative. And if you look at the results of our young men, for instance, who have succumbed in combat in Vietnam and Korea, 80% of our 20-year-old GIs who died in combat, at autopsy, there was evidence of coronary artery disease that could be seen without a microscope. It was not enough yet to cause heart attacks or clinical events. Those still are several decades away. But it was extremely informative that we are doing something in this culture that is creating this epidemic of disease, and we now pretty well absolutely know the answer. And the exciting thing is that there's something that every person can do to prevent this from happening. Good health is not accidental. It's so empowering when people begin to understand it.
You mentioned that your dream is to see the eradication of heart disease. Is that correct?
Well, if we can see it in other cultures, I think that we can do it eventually in this country as well. I mean, for instance, look what happened, how educated people became with smoking. I know that when I finished all my training, if we ever had guests over at the house, and this was in the early 1960s, it would be inhospitable if you didn't put out ashtrays and bring in cigarettes for these guests to smoke while they were in your house. Nobody would ever dream of that today. There has been a tremendous education program where people really now fully understand the tremendous dangers of cigarette smoking. And now we have to start all over again and do the same thing with certain foods. And if I've got a moment, I'd like to explain how that works. Let's talk about where there is agreement. All experts would agree that where this disease has its inception, where it starts, is at this remarkable, delicate, one-layer thick lining of our blood vessels. It has a name, the endothelial cells. This is a remarkable lining because the endothelial cells, when they're working correctly, make lots and lots of this wonderful molecule that we call nitric oxide. And it has amazing functions. Nitric oxide is what keeps our blood flowing smoothly. Nitric oxide is what allows our arteries to widen and dilate whenever we exercise or go upstairs to deliver more blood to the muscles that need that blood. Nitric oxide prevents inflammation from developing in the wall of the arteries, and nitric oxide prevents the formation of blockages or plaque. So you might be saying, well, now wait a minute. With that wonderful mechanism, why does anybody ever have vascular disease? Well, in the last 15 and 18 years, through research, it is very clear now exactly what are the foods that imperil, impoverish, compromise, and injure those delicate endothelial cells and their capacity to make that wonderful nitric oxide. What happens?
Hi, it's Michael Senoff with HardToFindSeminars.com. Thanks for watching this video. You know, many of my interviews last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, sometimes even up to 2.5 hours long. They're actual mini-seminars, and you've just listened to a short sample of just one of over 117 hours of exciting, hard-hitting, mind-blowing interviews on how to make money in direct mail, advertising, copywriting. I assure you, there is not a resource anywhere on the internet or on the planet that comes close to the free information I provide at HardToFindSeminars.com. So go right now to HardToFindSeminars.com and you'll have free access to 117 hours of audio interviews with typed word-for-word downloadable transcripts and downloadable MP3 files. Please browse some more of the videos or go right directly to HardToFindSeminars.com. Thanks for watching.